All right, perfect. So, hello everyone, and welcome to our second episode of the GSEO Interview series, where we bring students around the world closer to innovators, researchers, and thinkers who shape the future of science and technology. Today, we're excited to speak with Dr. Anna, an associate professor at the University of Miami, and she has completed her postdoctoral education from Stanford. Her research explores the cognitive and emotional effects of emerging media and technology on learning, attitudes, and human behavior. From virtual reality and learning science to the future of education, this conversation explores not only where immersive technology is today, but where it can take us next. So, whether you're interested in VR, psychology, education, emerging technology, or pursuing any type of research yourself, we hope this conversation gives you a new perspective on how technology can shape the way we learn and interact with the world. Welcome, Dr. Anna. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Thank you, Kartik and Shashwat, for the invitation. I'm Anna Queiroz, associate professor here at University of Miami. My background is in psychology, so bachelor's, master's, PhD in psychology, and then my postdoc in dual communication and education at Stanford. I started, working on immersive technologies more than a decade ago when the technology was very, very different from what it is today. And I'm very happy to share what we have been finding through these years and be helpful on, inspiring students like you both, to pursue academic careers if that's what you are looking for.
Perfect. It sounds excellent. Thank you so much for joining us today. Without further ado, let's jump into the interview. Shashwat, all yours.
Right. So let's get started with your journey into research and academia mainly. So you worked as an entrepreneur, educator, researcher, and a psychologist. So I'd like to ask, how did all those different experiences eventually lead you into immersive technology and learning?
Yeah, I always think about that because I don't think I had a usual career path. So I studied psychology on my bachelor's and I fell in love with human resources during my fifth year of undergrad studies. And I co-founded a company at that time. So the company was focused on providing human resources services to the community, and it was linked to the university. So it was inside accelerator at the university back in Brazil. That's where I was on my undergrad. And with that experience, I learned so much, and it was a nonprofit organization. So the focus was that the institution would be more than I, and it would, leave after I graduate. And it exists until today. They won a couple of awards in the recent years. So it's really nice to see this almost 20 years of the nonprofit working there. So that's how my, entrepreneurial initiatives started. So I graduated, and I was like, okay, now I will leave the company here at the university. I will start a new one for, I graduated. So still working with human resources. First, I was on a business program. So since I graduated, I started a business degree, and I was helping startups to write proposals to get funding, to present, to pitch their proposals, and then I would work with the team and the behaviors they need, the type of team they needed. So a mix of HR and more like a business plan. And that worked really well. From that, I realized there was a need for specific training programs in that area. And that's when I started another company focused on immersive training. So I'm talking about immersive training 20 years ago, and that's very different than VR. So what we used to do is we would bring people to a hotel, usually maybe 10 kilometers from the city. So it was more like a rural area. They didn't have, internet, no mobile phone, so they could disconnect. and really focus on what we would work during that weekend. So they would come on Friday and leave on Sunday. And during these days, we would have several activities, immersive activities. So we would manipulate lights, sounds, even scents. We had actors, all of these to put people in situations that would trigger emotions, different emotions, and that they, after experiencing that emotion, we would discuss what happened, how could be different, if they would like that to be different, and work on a plan for behavior change. So because that was something innovative, I started to teach. I was invited to teach at university level on entrepreneurship. And with that experience, that's when my interest started on education. Having my students, it was so interesting, two very different types of students. Like the morning students, they were very dedicated to academia, they could just study, and the students at night usually were the working students, so they were working full-time during the day and studying at night. They have very different skills, behaviors. It was like, well, I feel like we need to think about that. We have to, education can be improved. And at the same time, that's when the smartphones came out, and they started to bring the smartphones to my class. And I was mad with that because, they were texting. And I was like, why not we use the technology for learning instead of distracting for learning? So that's when it started. I decided then to focus my master's on regular media and literacy acquisitions. So all the cascade of thoughts, right, was, okay, what are they struggling here doing undergrad studies? Maybe started back then when they were learning to read and write and struggled with reading and writing for a couple of years. That put them a little bit behind. And if we could use technology to support that. So that's when I started, investigating media in education. And VR was a natural, path, because then I moved to the US. And here in the US, I had my first VR experience 13, 14 years ago. And with that experience, I realized that would come, like VR would become a thing in education and even, for entertainment at home. And I decided to investigate on my PhD. So what would be the implications of that technology? So I started my PhD thinking about, I'm not sure this technology works for education, because I saw the smartphones being distracting my students in the class. Maybe VR is going to be even more, distracting. So that's the thought I started my research. And then I conducted many studies at Stanford, and that gave me the support to understand that it's not if the technology works, but how it works. And then I graduated my PhD and kept working at Stanford on a postdoc with this dual appointment at the Graduate School of Education and the Department of Communication.
Interesting. It sounds, to be very honest, it sounds very cool because, as you mentioned, you started exploring the area of virtual reality and this media back 15 or 20 years ago. And I assume back then it wasn't very much developed, so it must have been challenging as well that you're stepping into a particular field. But yeah, very interesting. All right, well, let's move on towards the second one. I mean, how did your research interests evolve from your PhD in learning sciences to your work at Stanford and now currently at University of Miami?
Yeah, so, at Stanford, I focused on research deeply. So that's when I conducted many studies, some of them in the lab, so more controlled studies where I could, control the time that the participants were using the technology, the stimuli that were watching in VR, and exactly all the instructions we gave them. And with the findings of those lab studies, I started to think about, okay, so when we bring to the classroom in schools, it will it may change, right? Because field studies and lab studies, sometimes we find different things because the environment is different. So I started to work with schools to bring then the technology to the schools, and replicated, the findings were replicated. I started to find the same things. And after that, I'm Brazilian, and I have a very good relationship with several institutions in Brazil. And I started to think about, okay, I need to bring this technology there, and I want to bring this technology to the kids who would not have access. So I worked with a nonprofit organization there to bring the technology to about 33,000 students. So it was a 3 years project. We just wrapped up this project recently, and it was supported on all these findings from the lab studies, the studies I ran on the schools in California, and then we had this large implementation. So from that, at Stanford, the timing was very good. They were starting the Stanford Accelerator for Learning in the Graduate School of Education. And I was graduating, my PhD. So they invited me to join the accelerator to contribute on the immersive technologies and the discussions around the future of education. So how we could use this technology in the future education. So I started to have this dual appointment on both. So in the virtual human interaction lab with Professor Jeremy Belanson is, most of my research, I've worked with him there. And then in the Graduate School of Education was more a strategic group thinking about the future of education and immersive technologies. And then University of Miami, and of course I used to teach before in Brazil. I was teaching at universities before I came to the United States. So that was something I wanted to go back to do, right? To go back to teaching again. And University of Miami is a place where it's very unique here, what we have, and that's what really, made me fall in love with the institution. There is an initiative that was started by the chair of the Department of Interactive Media, Professor Kim Ritter. There is the UMverse. So it's a vertical where if you teach, if you study, if you're a staff member at University of Miami and you want to use VR, you can do it. It's accessible for everybody. So we have hundreds and hundreds of headsets, and there are grants every year, and maybe 10 to 12 proposals are awarded to develop VR content, either for teaching, research, or any kind of application in the clinic, medical school. So now we have more than 60 courses using VR on a regular basis here at University of Miami. And for me, it's amazing because that's what I believe, the VR in the classroom based on research. So here we have both things working together.
Cool. All right. Well, that sounds nice, to be honest. And if you were to look back, what is something that you believed about education or technology early in your career that you no longer believe today?
I think I had this, belief that the technology, it works, doesn't work. Work doesn't work. And it's not exactly that. It's how it works, It's the context that you are using the technology. It's the design of the experience that counts more than technology itself. So early on my career, I remember when I was thinking about VR, it was more like, VR is helpful or not for education. And it's not the answer. It can be very helpful, but it can be very unhelpful as well. It can actually harm learning depending on the type of content or context that you're using. So these, nuances of technology in general, not only VR, but mobile phones, softwares and in computer, desktops, in the classroom, this kind of uses, they are very context dependent, design dependent to think about if it works or not.
Fair enough. All right. Okay, well, I think my part is over. let's move on with Karthik.
All right. Thank you, Shashwat. So in the second part of the interview, we'll be discussing a little bit more into your research and what you've done, specifically about virtual reality. So on that topic, nowadays technology is becoming more and more used in education. What's one sector where you think that technology or VR specifically can help in education where the traditional textbooks cannot? So what's one point VR can hit what textbooks cannot?
Yeah, so one thing that we have been seeing a huge increase on VR adoption is on, for example, medical training. So in the medical schools, besides learning anatomy, learning all about physiology and so forth, you have to learn how to extract information from your patient, to create some rapport with the patient, make sure your patient is following the instructions you are giving, they are following the treatment. So all of these involves some soft skills and social skills, right? And especially with AI recently and the possibility of these more natural conversational simulations, many medical schools around the globe are using those simulations to support those social and soft skills training. Not only in the medical, but psychology, the same thing. So we just developed in collaboration with the College Dublin simulation where you embody the family therapist and you have different cases of family situations in front of you and different, compositions of families in front of you. And AI helps to feed those simulated patients. And you, as a student in family therapy, you can practice different scenarios. How do you communicate with them? Everything can be recorded. We can analyze all this content. So the wealthy of data we have nowadays and that VR allows, it's something incredible that we are still scratching the surface on how to understand all this data.
I see. And on the topic which you were talking about, using VR in medicine, that's definitely something which helps medical schools a lot. But according to your research, do you think that using virtual technology could really help the way that these students will behave in real life? So as in, like, will they be able to perform operations the same way as they would if they were using a textbook?
They can have one more layer of practice. So imagine if you are practicing surgery, right? The very traditional way would be you learn the theoretical aspects of surgery, the procedures you need, maybe you have a mannequin to start, and you have the body pieces in the lab that you can, but the body pieces are very different from the actual live person that you have to, proceed surgery. And I know because my undergrad was in the biology department, although it was psychology. So I had many years in the lab. So it's very different. You can add one layer before you go directly to, of course, you observe dozens of times your professor or experts conducting the surgery, and that's still there. We will never replace that, but you just add one more layer where they can visually practice what will happen, how it would happen. And using high precision headsets, they can even practice the movement, right? The hand movements they need to execute during the surgery. So it gives one more layer of confidence for them before they go. So it's not that we are replacing anything, we are adding opportunities for practice. Same thing in architecture, engineering, and if we talk about K-12 education, we can bring this technology to allow students to go places they would never be able to. So for example, the project in Brazil with these thousands of students, I brought the Stanford experience called Coral Compass. That is, a team collected images underwater in Palau and showed the climate change effects, and the tourism effects on that reefs. Imagine if you are Brazilian, you have to travel all the way to Palau. It's very expensive. And then you have to learn how to dive. You have to rent the equipment. So there are several barriers for those students to actually have the first-hand experience there. So that's the reason I brought this experience in particular, because that's when we recommend the technology to simulate situations, as Professor Jeremy Bailenson described, that are dangerous, impossible, counterintuitive, or too expensive.
I see. Okay, right. So obviously, good point. It always helps to add a layer of sort of practice before you actually do the real thing, so you can get used to that sort of stress levels and everything before you actually do the operation, or as you said, go diving or something like that. Okay, fair point. That's a good point. Is there any specific sort of step at which virtual reality helps or is effective? So until what point would you use a virtual reality technology on, let's say, academics or studying or a degree, until it becomes proven to be effective?
Yeah, so how we do is, we first, when we develop the VR experience, we always have the subject matter involved on the development. So if we are developing an experience for chemistry, we are going to have an expert on that chemistry topic we wanted to simulate in the experience in the development phase, and active working on everything. So that's the first thing. The second is when the prototype is ready, we pilot test it. So we have students going through it, we measure learning, we measure learning transfer, or any variable that is relevant for that experience, for that learning experience using the simulation. And when we are happy with that, then that's when the experience is deployed in the classroom. So until it's not effective, we do not deploy that in the classroom.
Okay, that's excellent. So it goes through many layers of sort of security checks before you actually use it.
And that's one of the barriers for, I know maybe you're going to ask me that, but one of the barriers for the adoption of VR in the classroom is because it's expensive. It's not like building a PowerPoint. I hope soon it's going to become like that. And there are so many companies now helping on development, no-code development. But this cycle I mentioned to you, it takes more than a year, maybe 1.5 years. So the professor thinks about, or the teacher thinks about, I want to use VR in my classroom. Actually, that will only be possible almost 2 years later.
Interesting. That's nice. That's good to hear. Okay, perfect. So that will end off the section about VRs. Next up, Shashwat, go ahead. You can carry on.
Right. Thank you, Karthik. Now let's go on towards transforming education through technology. I believe, as you just answered, that before implementing VR or immersive technology completely, there's a certain procedure and rule that you're going to first test before, to ensure that it has a better outcome on the students and schools. Mm-hmm. But if we were to shift into complete VR learning, or basically like which subject or specific field, for instance, like physics, chemistry, biology, which one of these subjects would have the greatest potential to benefit the most from immersive technology?
Yeah, so here again, it's more nuanced, the answer. It's more like what content and how to simulate that content will be more effective. So we can have, for example, we can learn about climate change. That's very conceptual and has some procedural. So also this is an important difference. So when we are learning, there are some categories of learning. And one is the procedural, where you have to memorize the steps, or you have to memorize, movements. That's what we call the procedural learning. And we have the conceptual learning, where it's more abstract and you receive some new information and then you compare with what you already know. And then as a result, you have a new concept. of that topic. So what we have seen is most of the VR studies focused on procedural more than conceptual. And because of the technology capabilities of, you can move, that's the difference. Like when you are watching a video, you're not moving, your movement is not being tracked. But in VR, you can move and all your movement can be tracked. We can practice procedural tasks much more close to what would be in the natural environment and the reality. So that supports a higher learning transfer to the real world. So when you ask me, what works best? So procedural knowledge, procedural tasks, the studies have been showing that VR most often is better than traditional media because of these capabilities of the technology. On the conceptual knowledge, that is, receiving this new information, trying to understand that, compare with what I already know, it's very dependent on the design of the experience, because VR can be very engaging, it can become overwhelming, and then become distracting. So that distracting depends on the design. So imagine if you are in a simulation where you're hearing something and at the same time you have to pay attention to visual cues around, and then you have to move. It's too much, right? You're doing these three things at the same time. So for conceptual, usually you require more like thinking about the content you are receiving. You need a little bit more focus on the information you are receiving. So the design of the experience needs to take that into consideration. So it's not if it works more for one topic or other, but how you create the learning experience. And more recently, working with schools, we have been finding not only that, but how you embed that experience in the curriculum. So how do you connect the VR experience with other activities outside of the classroom? Or outside of VR, in the classroom.
Yeah. Understood. Okay, I do agree with the points or the factors you mentioned about how VR in education or like learning can become overwhelming or distracting, because there, as you said, there is multiple factors that are being considered while using the technology. So, okay, that is valid very much. What are the biggest barriers that are preventing technologies like VR from becoming a normal part of education? I think you did answer that, but I think, please continue.
Yeah, there are some more elements. So we just spoke about, content quality and cost and time. And one other important thing is, depending, and I believe it's kind of a global situation, but I hope some countries, they can have a more comfortable workload for the teachers and professors, but usually teachers and professors, they are very busy with the day-to-day activities, the teaching, the paperwork, the class preparation, grading, and so on, that they do not have the time to really go deep and experiment and try a new technology. So if they had, more time available, and we know that it's not a simple answer because it's cost, you have their salaries, you have working hours, and they have the responsibilities they have. But if they could have more time to really play with the technology, to understand the technology as much as they understand their mobile phones, then because they are the ones who should tell us, hey, my students are struggling with this. How can we use VR to, support that type of learning? So they know what their students need. They know where it would be the best moment to bring the technology in the classroom. So it's what we call like a teacher preparation and support. That's another barrier because they are already overwhelmed with work. And I don't think it's fair to just drop the headset on their table, say, hey, now you have to use it. but they don't have the time to actually understand what they have to use.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, as far as I understand that, as teachers these days already have basically a lot on their plate, considering technologies like VR for education, it would take a lot of time to adapt into specifically how it how easily it can distract or overwhelm the students. It can become worse for the teachers. So I think time is one of the most important factors as the barrier into adapting into this technology. That's it for this section. Karthik, you can take over.
All right. Thank you, Shashwat. So on the topic of education, now let's go into something a little bit more modern. So as everyone knows, AI is everywhere. And we're seeing it a little bit more integrated into virtual reality as well. So what do you think will happen, Dr. Hannah, when VR and AI will truly be able to converge? What do you think humans can make out of it?
Yeah, so we are already using that here. They are together. So I just developed a VR experience. So going back to the reading and writing skills that I started really early on my research career, I brought all of that knowledge and, the questions I still have about how media can support reading and writing, and then created a VR experience for either kids or teenagers or adults who want to learn a second language to develop spelling skills. So this is just the first of a series of experience we are developing. And we are using AI for several things. First, we use the AI to generate images and words according to, the proficiency level of each participant. So it would, in real time bring, if the word in front of you is cat, would bring an image of a cat, the word of the cat. And that's one very simple, initial use. But the most interesting use we have in the same experience is on assessment. So we are using AI to support real-time assessment of the performance and to identify if there are any, pattern on the mistakes the user is making during the game. So it would require, on a traditional way, for a researcher after the session to check all the data and then have the insights. Now we are bringing this to real-time assessment, and each round is based on this assessment. So the 5 first rounds are just the baseline. So they play 5 times, and then the AI has enough data to say, hey, I can understand the level of fluency and proficiency this user is. I can understand the mistakes it's making. So now next word will be something to support mitigating these mistakes and strengthening the skills they already have. And that goes progressively. So that's one example. Other example is the AI for the family therapies training that we embedded to support. Never support the therapist, right? Just as an educational platform to simulate the family. So it brings to the therapist that is in training so many different situations that they can practice beforehand. Because usually what happened was they would maybe watch recorded sessions of other therapists conducting the session, or they would be observing in real time the sessions. That's how they used to learn. But with this, they can learn. It's flexible. If I'm here, you are there, we can be in the same classroom learning about family therapy. You can practice there, I practice here. We practice in private, so there is no social judgment. You can just conduct the session as you think would be the best way. And after, when we review the data, then you will receive the feedback. So that's another plus of using this type of AI in simulations like that.
Wow. So AI is used pretty much everywhere now. It's not just used in teaching, but you can use it in assessment as well.
Yeah.
That's pretty great. That's a cool thing. So, with this growth of AI, with the sudden expansion, the sudden boom of AI in the past few years, where do you think you could see the AI plus VR heading in the next 10 or 20 years? How would students and teachers use these in classrooms?
Yeah, I see AI more and more supporting development. Either, we have our XR developers here. Sometimes, of course, they go on Copilot and ask, hey, is this code, it's breaking, what's wrong? And then, help them give some ideas. But we have this integrated in some XR development platforms in a much more robust way. And that will be more and more, I can see. No-code platforms using AI for sure is something that is the next big thing for VR or XR in general. These conversational situations, I think more and more, like the NPCs in games being used, using AI in a more natural, less hallucination, and more tuned to the social context and the conversation. So these improvements on what we already have, and some jumps on, and that's what I think maybe in 10 years, I don't know. It's always hard to talk about years, because in 10 years, I'm going to see this interview and say, hey, I can't believe I said that 10 years ago. But having supporting development, that's what I would like to see. The AI supporting development in a very robust way, so that teachers, professors, they can, as they have the same effort to develop a slide or a VR experience. When that happens, I can see then the adoption will be much, much more like integrated in the curriculum.
Perfect. Yeah, as you mentioned before as well, with the workload that teachers have, adding AI to them and like VR, it'll be difficult for them to learn and adapt, especially given how fast technology is changing and how it's modernizing quite a bit these days. And with this type of change, with this rapid development, what do you think are the ethical standards which teachers and professors must adhere to so that we can use it properly and for the benefit of the students?
Yeah, so when we think about AI, there's, it's a lot of experts already showing that, like asking people to pay attention to, the guardrails, like making sure that you test your, prompts before, that you're sure that you don't allow any kind of content you don't want your user to be exposed to coming up from the AI usage. So that's something very, very important. And we take a long time here testing all our, prompt parameters to make sure, for example, image generator, like we thousands and thousands of times we ran it and tested to make sure no, image we didn't want to be shown to the students was shown. The other thing is, we use here, and I know Stanford, the same thing, like we develop experiences focusing on the positive use of the technology and positive outcomes. We are not looking for negative outcomes. We don't want to expose our participants to, some sort of content that we may think can, disturb them. But we know there are content being developed in the world that may be disturbing or that may have, negative outcomes. So this is something that needs more caution and concern. Of course, in the classroom, all the content is curated. The teachers and professors, they are carefully picking the content they want to show. But when you are using at home and the student have a headset, the content that they can access, we don't know, right? And we don't want them to be exposed to anything that could be disturbing for them. So that's another, when my students, they receive a headset and they bring it home for the whole semester. And I always tell them, be careful, be cautious, just, watch what is positive for you. The other thing is the time that you are in VR. I never, ask them to be like 1 hour in VR. Maybe half an hour is enough. It's more than enough for a session. Then take a break, because it's too much. You are in this simulated environment that your brain process as real. So everything that you are being exposed there, your brain is trying to understand as a reality, right? And that taxes your brain, your body, you get exhausted. So take breaks. If you feel any kind of discomfort, some people are more sensitive to cyber sickness and feel a little bit dizzy, and depending mostly on the content, the design of the experience. If this, more cyber sickness effects. So always be attentive to that as a professor, as a teacher, developing or selecting a content. Go through the content several times. Make sure it's exactly what you're looking for before suggesting that for the students.
I see. And, because like what you said, students may be using technology either for the wrong purposes or for too much of time for something that doesn't benefit them. Would you say, in addition to using the technology, it's important to educate them on how to use it properly?
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Perfect. We're moving on to the last section now, specifically targeting about your research and the impact that it has on the world. Joshua, take it away.
Right. So as someone who has had a tremendous amount of experience in major fields like psychology, immersive technology, and all the various sorts of education you've had, what is some advice you would give to someone who is trying to study AI or artificial intelligence or immersive technology, or somebody who's going into any particular science? What would your advice be?
Yeah, that's what I tell my students all the time is, one, make sure you're pursuing a path that you really enjoy, that you have an emotional connection. It's your passion. You really like to be researching or working on that field. We know that a career decision is not something simple. And I worked a little bit with that early on in my career on, career decisions. And sometimes when we are young, we think that decision will be forever. And that's another myth. The decision, and maybe now it's a little bit more known that, but when I was, selecting which undergrad program I would go, it was like, oh, will be forever. And it's not. We have so many different paths that we can go through during our careers. And well, as a psychologist, so this is my advice, and as a researcher, really find something that you connect with, because regardless of the path you're going to take, you're going to have, barriers, you're going to have days that you're exhausted, and then you're going to, go that extra mile. If you're not connected to that decision you made, or that topic, if you don't enjoy that, it's going to be extremely hard to go on that extra mile. And the second thing is, content is not a problem anymore. My generation, we had to rely on books, on printed materials to get the information. So imagine, like, if I want to learn about something, I had to go to a library to get a book, and maybe that book was not translated to the language I speak. So even that, barrier we had. Nowadays, no, you can have all type of content available on your smartphone, and you can translate that in real time. So be wise on where you put your time and what type of content you're reading, because especially with AI and early models, that they make mistakes. So you can't trust 100% on the information you are reading. So how do you evaluate that information and make sure, okay, this is a trustful source, this information is correct, it's not a mistake. because I think this is the challenge for this generation, making sure you understand the sources of trustful information, correct information, and based on that, you can evaluate the other content you are being exposed to.
Fair enough. I really do appreciate your advice on this because especially right now, me and Karthik, we're in the stage where we're about to commence our undergraduate studies at universities, and I believe it's great advice for us because as you said, for now at the stage where we're transitioning into universities, it becomes a thing where we think that our career or any field that we're pursuing into becomes the most important thing. But as we grow older, we find out that there are multiple other things that we could potentially partake in. So well, thank you very much, Miss. I'd just like to ask one more thing, is that if you had unlimited funding for and resources for a particular research project, what question or what aspect or of a field would you want to answer in?
Yeah, so I would keep on my, psychological implications of immersive technologies. It's not, I think I would not be specific to only one topic because that's how I am. I'm curious about many things. So, but in general, if I have an umbrella, and this is my umbrella, it's the psychological implications of immersive technologies, either in the learning context or in the social context, leadership. So based on my HR, startups and experience, I'm very interested on how we can use this technology in the workplace to improve relationships, leadership, performances, and so on. So I would keep working on that. I think what is taking most of my time nowadays, that I've been thinking more about it nowadays, is on the literacy skills. So this experience we just developed that, I've been working with literacy for 20 years now, or a little bit more than that, literacy acquisition. So that's something that I really, really would like to investigate more, because it's a responsibility. When you bring this technology to kids, it's a huge responsibility. So that's why we run a lot of research before bringing this to them.
Rightly said. So I just want to have or ask you one more advice-based question, is that since we're progressing into universities, and it's not the only thing that we're probably going to be focusing on. I believe that we're not only going to be very studious, but we're also going to be very entrepreneurial, just like you are. So if you were to give advice to students our age who are just going into universities, what advice would you give in terms of the entrepreneur aspect or the mindset that you have learned along your experience?
Yeah, excellent question. Be curious. Don't limit yourself to only the classwork. That's not enough. That's the minimum for you to graduate. But nowadays, just having a degree is not enough. You need to find what is unique on you, that you like, that you have the skills, that make you, wake early in the morning thinking about that. Think about that. What really doesn't make you sleep sometimes? You go to bed and you're like, oh my goodness, I wish I could solve this. There is this problem, or I would love to be doing that. Think about those things and be curious. Go out there, meet people. Something that we sometimes don't, maybe early on the undergrad, we don't think about it, but the relationships you're gonna make are gonna last forever. Like I have on my WhatsApp group, my kindergarten friends, my K-12 friends, my undergrad friends, they're all here and we all support each other. Many times in our careers, hey, do you know someone who can help me with that? And they will help you. Maybe your first business, as it was with me, with my undergrad college colleagues, we started together and we grew together for a couple of years, those companies. And if you check on the very successful companies, usually that's what happened, because when you start a new business, you need to know the person you are working with. You know that from 5 years together on undergrad, for example. So you can trust them, the skills they have, when you can count on them, or their weakness that you need to support. So expose yourself. Look for clubs, look for, gatherings, get to know people, do what you're doing here. What's amazing. I was very impressed by the invitation for this interview, the series that you're doing. You're getting to know experts, and keep being curious. And don't think there is this box that you have to fit. No, go out of the world and try new things.
Right. I truly appreciate your advice, Dr. Anna, because as you just said, that to be entrepreneurial, it's better to be explorative and being curious about the things around us and not being restricted within the field that we're pursuing our degree in. Specifically with the growing technology, it would be much better if we are, open-minded about learning new things. So, yeah, thank you very much. I think let's move on towards the next section, Karthik.
Okay, so we actually have one more question planned. However, I do want to ask a follow-up question about what you mentioned in the previous section. So with technology becoming something so big, I'm seeing many schools implementing virtual reality for primary students as well, so as early as first grade, second grade. Do you think that's a good idea? How early do you think these children should be exposed to VR tech?
Yeah, we don't know the answer yet on the implications of this technology on such early students. I work with fourth grade and up. So first, second, third grade, I don't bring VR for them. I usually, but they want to be part of the project, right? So we bring them AR. So we create simulations on a tablet that they are very familiar with, and they can play with that. So we use another type of immersive technology that's not VR, because the headset is not, ergonomic for them. It's too heavy. The distance of the lens is not for a small head as they have, and the content is still very, very few options that you have that you can bring them. So, and there is not enough research yet to understand the implications. So I would not recommend that early. I have a 6-year-old daughter. Have she tried VR? Of course, she's my daughter. I bring VR home. She's curious about it. But I think she had maybe 3 times, 5 minutes maximum each one, in a very silly game for her age. So it's something that here and there, for curiosity or maybe to spark something interesting, the teachers of course can use it, but not as a regular basis, to expose them to this technology that we still have to understand how it works with that population.
And wait, sorry, just one small thing I'd like to ask is, like, if kids or students are exposed to VR technology at a very young age, then it would also bring risk to their eye health and mental health, I believe, or is it still not explored yet?
We don't know yet. We don't know. Yeah, that's something, because imagine conducting a study for that purpose. You are exposing kids at that age, and you want to see if it's going to have a bad, influence on their eyesight. I don't want to expose kids and to see them having bad eyesight, to say, hey, this causes that. So it's a very complicated investigation. So to be on the safe side, we just say, hey, let's not use this during this age because we don't know yet.
Fair enough. Right. Karthik, go ahead.
Yeah, no, definitely. Fair enough. I understand as well. It would be harmful to the kids, definitely. So yeah, good point. But as you mentioned, you work with grade 4 and above. Is there any sort of pattern which is shown, like do younger students show more growth when they're using VR, or is it more growth shown by like the older students in secondary school or even in the undergrad or postgrad?
What I can tell you is about data are collected that are not published yet, but what I found, so I will give you some context. I had students from 6th grade up to 12th grade going through the same VR experiences, right? And then we collected, of course, pre and post data. So we measured their knowledge about the ocean, and that was the experience about. The experiences were Coral Compass and Crystal Reef from the Stanford Virtual Human Interaction Lab. And we had all this baseline knowledge about ocean acidification, climate change, and then after. And what I found was very interesting, like, of course, 6th graders and 12th graders, they had a very different pre-test result. Like the 6th graders, they are expected to know less than 12th graders, right? But at the post-test, all of them got the same average on their scores. It means that the growth of the 6th graders were higher than the 12th graders. There are a couple of explanations. One, it can be the ceiling effect that we call. It means that my tests were like measuring something that maybe I should have tested more difficult content, then I could get some more granularity is one thing. But the other thing that I believe is because it's very engaging, the experience, and those both experiences were very well developed with all the pedagogy needed to be an effective experience. The students, they regardless of the age, they really understood the content and they were excited, they were thinking about it. That promoted, this result. So, but that's one thing that's not published yet. I don't know if I'm gonna ever publish it, let's see, because I think it's not that robust to say that, but I just wanted to share what I, in my own research, have been finding.
Wow, interesting to hear. Pretty surprising that, grade 6 students and grade 12 students, they ended up scoring at around the same level.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting. And I'm assure you, if you do end up publishing it, all of our GSEO readers and subscribers will definitely be there to read it first up.
Thank you. Yeah. If you're curious about more research, so here at the University of Miami, I just launched my lab last year. It's called the Future Realities Research Lab. That's all the papers we have been publishing are there. All our research projects are there. So if you're curious about the simulations I mentioned here during the interview, you can access them there. You can find my email, so feel free to reach out.
Okay, great, excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that.
You're welcome.
And to end off our interview, one final question. If you could leave young scientists and engineers watching this interview with just one idea about the future of technology and human learning, what would you want them to remember?
Yeah. Think about how this technology you are developing on can be used. I think for engineers, you're, the motor of the innovation in our world. You are developing so many fantastic, products, apps, communication technologies. And while you are developing it, think about all the time, think how people are going to use it. Is this the way I want them to use it? And of course, user testing is always very, very helpful during your development. Your professors talk about this a lot, but that's what I tell my students. Like, think about the good use. If it's mostly going to be used for good, go for it. If not, think twice.
Great. All right, perfect. What a great way to end the interview. Shashwat, do you have any more questions?
I don't.
Okay, all good. Perfect. Dr. Anna, it was a pleasure talking to you. We learned so much. It was amazing having you on the interview. Thank you so much for your time today.
Likewise,
Right.
my pleasure. And I wish you a very successful journey in your new programs. Please keep in touch and a very successful journey for you.
Great.
Thank you very much for your advice and time, Dr. Anna.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.